Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to the second of 3 events in our Wellness Center series for parents and caregivers, you and your youth, focusing on keeping your teen connected to the family. My name is Rick Lodell. I'm the Manager of Community Projects and Partnerships for New Westminster Schools. Before we get started, I would like to recognize and acknowledge the Kakite First Nation, as well as all Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territories we live, we learn, we play, and we do our work. I'm proud to host you virtually through our newly opened Wellness Centre at New Westminster Secondary School. For a quick bit of information, on Saturday, May 14th, we will actually be hosting an opening celebration for the centre. So please stay tuned for more information on that event. We would love to see you there. And now for our presentation tonight. Cameras and microphones will be turned off. We encourage you to utilize the chat function for questions. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Dr. Saira is a registered clinical counselor with a PhD in transpersonal psychology. She is the clinical director of Dragonfly Wellness Centre, an online hub for mental health, personal growth, and counseling. She works from diverse cultural backgrounds. She works with adults from diverse cultural backgrounds who are looking for a new approach to mental health. She specializes in depression, anxiety, family harmony, and burnout. Dr. Saira also runs support groups for women and newlyweds, has a free podcast, and provides teaching videos through Dragonfly Wellness TV on YouTube. And we are so grateful she's here with us tonight. Dr. Saira, thank you.
I think that's Rick.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be back. Let's get started. So I just would love to know who's in the room. If we were all in a room together, I would be able to see you and ask for a show of hands, but since we can't do it that way, I'd love to know if you're here as a parent, how old are your children? So if you could write that in the chat, and if you're here as a caregiver and an educator, if you could add that as well. So like a parent and then the age, and then caregiver, so then we kind of know who's here and I can craft the talk for you specifically. This will be recorded, so it'll be available for others as well, but you get it customized just for you. So we've got a parent of a 13-year-old, parent of an 11 and 13, 11, 10 and 12, 12 and 24, 12 and 15, 12 and 13, almost 12, 17, 12 and 15, 11, 13, 16, 14. So it sounds like we have some on the younger side, like the 12, 13, and then we have a few in the 16, 17 age as well here. So we'll just kind of and here's the thing about adolescence, and you probably know that if you have one, there's phases within adolescence as well. So there are, what a 13-year-old is going to be going through and experiencing will clearly be different than what an 18 or 19-year-old will be experiencing. So kind of adjust what I'm saying to fit your particular the child that you're thinking about. And if you have any questions as we're going, type them in the chat. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to capture as many as I can, and I'll also have Rick helping me out. So if I miss any, then at the end we'll loop back and ask those as we go. So here we go. Are you ready? Okay. Somebody's here with kids 30 and 31. So just for information, you're here to learn. That's fantastic. So let's get started. So this is our topic for today. So it's a 3-part series, but if you weren't here for the last one, that's totally fine. There won't be anything that you won't be confused because it's all kind of standalone. But today's session is about, am I invisible? I am invisible. I think I got a typo on that. It should be, am I invisible? Keeping your teen connected to the family. And this is like one of those elusive things that people say, like, how do we do this? It seems like a good idea. We know it's important, but how do we do it? So we'll get into some of the why and some of the how as we go today. So here's our plan. We'll first set the context. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the background and the thinking that's going into this particular presentation, so you have a framework, because there's so many different theories out there. So I want you to kind of be grounded in where it's coming from. And then we'll move to their peers and have a conversation about what is the relationship that teenagers have with each other, what's good about that, what's challenging about that. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time on your parenting. So getting you to reflect a bit about why you parent the way you do, how you parent, and what changes and adjustments you might want to make to tweak a little bit so that you can have a closer relationship to your child. In the bottom of the corner here, you'll see the little head. So if you're confused about like where we are, just go to the corner and you'll see which of those three that we're at. So I want to start with my philosophical background, kind of where I'm coming from and where the content is coming from. So there's two different things that we'll be looking at that kind of inform this presentation. So one is attachment and one is family systems. So let me tell you a little bit about each. So attachment theory talks about how we bond. To keep it really simple, how we as social mammals bond with each other in our communities in order for optimal brain development and just development of our communities and our societies. So in attachment work, we're looking at how do we get closer to each other as people. Specifically in the context of parenting, attachment theory teaches us that parents, we kind of encourage parents to trust their instincts, right? And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that as we get further along. But we're saying that you are exactly what your child needs. Okay, so trusting your instincts, trusting that you're the right parent for your child, and that the bond between you is more important than any techniques or strategies or any checklist that you might have. Right? So that bond is the most important thing. So I'll be talking about that bond and how to deepen that bond as we go. The second system or the second way of thinking that informs this particular presentation is what we call family systems theory. And so in family systems, particularly Bowen family systems, it talks about how seeing the family kind of as an organism as itself. So there's these different pieces. There's you, there's your child, there's possibly a partner, possibly other children, maybe grandparents, maybe aunts and uncles. There's family, there's people. And when one element of the system changes, that impacts the whole system. Right? So it's very much a kind of a collectivist approach to families rather than individual members in a family. The family itself is something that we work with. And so that what I like about that is that it means that anybody in the family can take initiative for change in the family, which I think is really exciting. So you're here, you're the one who's perhaps wanting to take initiative for change. And so even if your child, your teenager changes or doesn't change, if you shift the way you approach things, the whole system will be impacted. So those are the two things that inform this particular presentation and this series. And let's go from there to the juicy stuff. So I have a picture here of two little huts, and I wanted to start just kind of like we did in our last session, exploring the narrative that we have about adolescence. So the last session we talked about, what do we assume to be true about adolescents as far as their personalities and the kinds of people they are. And today, I thought we'd explore this narrative about what it means to become an adolescent. Like, what does that actually mean? So in traditional societies, there wasn't really a concept of adolescence. There was childhood and there was adulthood, right? And adolescence was kind of this bridge. And it was a short bridge because childhood would last for a certain amount of time, and children would be taken through rituals and initiations to help them become adults, right? So say, I'm just throwing out some numbers here, but let's say 13 or so would be the end of childhood. And then we're starting to move now into adulthood. And so that child would then be kind of getting ready to build their own hut, right? To put it really simply. So it's like moving away from your hut to kind of building their own hut. And I think that that framework is something many of us have forgotten about, right? That actually what we're trying to do with our youth is actually prepare them for adulthood. One of the things that's gone wrong in our society is that there's this what we call extended adolescence. So people who are in their 20s, early to mid 20s, are still kind of acting like children, right? So instead of orienting our children towards moving into adulthood, we're orienting our youth to stay connected to their childhood. And that's where a lot of the problems start. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what to do about that. So in your thinking, if you could think about the fact that not thinking of the teenagers as something specifically different, but actually as a bridge between childhood and adulthood. And there's guides that are needed on this bridge, right? There's adults that need to kind of bring children into adulthood. And we've kind of messed that up a little bit. We've kind of put that responsibility on other children and trying to get children to raise each other. And that's where we see a lot of the conflict between families, because, well, we're expecting too much of our kids and we're expecting not enough of our kids at the same time. So we'll unpack that a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of pause here for a minute and see if there's any thoughts about that way of conceptualizing adolescence as actually the path between your hut and their hut, that path is adolescence. Any questions about that, that way of conceptualizing it? Type it in the chat while I get us ready for the next part. So here's your hut, and you're getting them ready to build their own hut. And there's a path here. So our job as adults, is to help them transition from our way of doing things, our world, to help them develop their own inner world. And there's steps to this, and I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty of it, but I'll give you some high-level ideas on how we might do that. So what is actually the goal? Developmentally speaking, what does nature want people to do during this age? Like, what is the goal? So there's two goals that are happening simultaneously for youth. So the one is becoming an adult. So becoming kind of fit for society, being able to fit into society, being socialized in and being a contributing member of society. That's one of the goals. Speaking from a biology perspective, speaking from a developmental perspective, nature wants these children to be able to now fit into society. However, there's another goal that's happening at the same time, which is knowing yourself. Okay, so, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit in that as we go, but I can start now. One of the things that happens for children as they move into adolescence is they start shifting to an inner richness. There's an inner tapestry that starts developing in children as 12, 13, and as they go. So there has to be a capacity to hold your own, to know yourself, and also to fit into society, become fit for society. So these two very different goals are being held in this tension by families, because you understand that you want to encourage your child to be, fit for society, and you also understand that there's value in them not just conforming completely and becoming like one of the crowd, but actually pursuing their own interests, their own dreams, their own goals. And so these are the two developmental goals that nature has for children. And the tension between those goals can sometimes be what throws all of us off. Okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here and talk to you about some of the changes. Now, there are the body changes, obviously, but there's other things that happen as far as psychological changes. And so I want to share some of these thoughts with you. And this relates now to how adolescents are going to start interfacing and interacting with others, both others in the family, others in the community, in the school community, or in the larger community, and whether that's other adults or other peers or those younger than them. So these psychological changes actually change the way that children start relating to the world. So one of the things that doesn't go away, that starts very, very young, is this idea of I want to belong. Now that's survival, right? Because like they say, a lone monkey is a dead monkey. Like if you're all alone out there in the wilderness, you're dead. So you have to be able, we have this urge and impulse to belong to our group, to belong to our community. The first place that impulse comes in is in the family, right? So this wanting to belong to the family. And so one of the things that we do with our children when they're young is we help them understand that they belong with us, that they're the same as us, that they can relate to us, that there's a safe space in us for them to be themselves, right? And so we carve out a space for our children to belong. And one of the things that can be a sticking point for families is when an adolescent doesn't feel like they belong in their family. They feel very different from the people in their family. Now, again, nature's creating that on purpose because they got to go build their own hut, right? So this sense of being a little bit different is somewhat important, but can you be different and still belong? And this is where it's so important, things like comparing our children. Oh, you know, your brother does this, and why can't you be more like your sister? We want to avoid that because we want to have space in the family for each individual child to be different, right? To be their own self and not have to just be like each other, because that builds resentment. Right? I mean, if you think about yourself as an adult, right? If you got compared to your coworker, your boss said, you know, Judy does such a good job on her reports and, you know, your reports are sloppy. First of all, you'd feel bad because you've been told your reports are sloppy, but you'd also kind of be irritated at Judy, even though Judy did nothing to you, right? And so that kind of comparison creates friction in the family. And so we want to be really mindful that we ensure that our family is a place where our children feel like they can belong. And one of the ways to do that is to talk about stories of sameness, right? And so one of the ways you do this is you talk about yourself when you were their age, but not, you know, when I was your age, life was so hard for me and it was, you have it easy, not like that, okay? Because that's going to get you an eye roll. You know it is, not like that. So the way that you're going to talk about yourself is, yeah, I remember being this age and feeling really worried, just like, you know, how you're worried about what your friends are going to think. I remember that. And it's so hard, isn't it? I don't even know how I got through that. So rather than offering advice and information as far as what they should do, to make yourself relatable, to help them know that this is not strange what they're going through, that it's a normal thing, and that they're going to be able, like encouraging them to craft their path through it. So if our children don't feel like they belong in our families, they will find somewhere else to belong, because that impulse to belong is very strong in adolescence. So the family can be one of the first places. Now, for those on the call who might be educators, another place that children can belong is with their teachers, right? And so being a teacher that collects the youth, that makes the youth feel nourished and important to them as individual people, right? So it's not like I'm the math teacher. It's like, sure, I'm teaching you math, but you as a human are important to me. And I see you as a human and as a growing human that is changing and has interesting ideas. Right? Now, teachers will tell me like, there's no room for that. There's no time for that. And I understand, but it could be, it's, you know, those passing moments where the child feels like somebody sees them, that they belong somewhere. Other places that children, as they come into their adolescence, can belong are places like sports teams, youth groups. Maybe you belong to a religious association or affiliation, that there's a belonging opportunity there. Leadership types of activities, volunteering. There's all of these different places where we can introduce our children to these places where they can belong, and not belong with other people their size and age and mentality. Okay, that will come naturally. They will be doing that anyway. We want them to feel like they belong around trusted adults. And this is something we've forgotten for like a couple generations. We've forgotten that we need adults to guide children to how to build a new hut. Other kids are not going to be able to teach your kid how to be an adult because they're not adults, right? So giving children an opportunity to belong with other mentors and guides and adults and people who they can be a bit vulnerable with and be themselves with. The thing about belonging in a peer, actually, I'll talk about that when we get to the peer thing. Okay. So that's the piece around belonging. Any questions about I want to belong? Now, while I want to belong, the other thing that happens in the adolescent psychology is I become important to me, and I actually become the most important to me. So suddenly, unlike in childhood, where the child was there and they were in the world and they were doing their thing. Suddenly, the adolescent gets this self-reflective capacity. They get the capacity to think about how they are and who they are. So little kids, when you talk to them about, like, tell me about, how you're doing, they'll tell you stories about their day, right? But adolescents and youth will have a deeper conversation, if you allow it, about who they are, what they stand for, what's important to them. They're starting to understand that it's an egocentric thing that happens, but it's essential that they start turning inward. And so sometimes that can look like selfishness. Sometimes it can look like they don't care about anybody but themselves, but that's nature doing its job, right? That's nature helping them understand that you're not a child anymore. Because when you can turn inward, then the next thing that happens is you start noticing that other people are also looking at you. Okay, so you see yourself in the mirror and you recognize that other people can also see you. And so that's where, for many people, many children, that self-consciousness starts, right? That feels like somebody's always looking at me all the time. And it actually feels like that for them, like they're always being watched, because that's the change that's happening. They're understanding that if I can see myself, wow, other people can see me too. And they don't have this experience in childhood. In childhood, they could try to empathize with others. So empathy is something that they pick up in childhood, but they can't really put themselves in the shoes of someone else and look back at themselves. They don't have the capacity for that. So it's only when the child starts becoming a teenager that they start realizing how they look to other people. And so they're going to spend a lot of time maybe in front of the mirror, actually, literally, for those who have teenagers, like just making sure everything is just perfect because it feels like everybody's looking at them. We grow out of that. Some of us never grow out of that, but hopefully we mature out of that, right? And we understand that actually nobody really cares. Nobody's looking at you at all. But if we try to articulate it that way to our children, we become those old people who don't understand anything, right? So remember how it felt like for you when, it was awkward and you felt like self-conscious and people were looking at you. And at the same time, you were also looking at you. You were questioning your values, your beliefs. You were trying to figure out, who am I outside of this hut, right? Who am I as my own person? So these are some of the inner conversations that are happening with our children. And it's so interesting if you invite them to share some of that. Now, we'll talk about this when we get into parenting strategies, how to do that. So I want to belong. I become the most important to me, which means I'm very self-absorbed. I'm all about me. And it's an important thing. They have to go through this. It can be frustrating for adults, but it's important because they're starting to develop that witness. I call it the witness consciousness, right? Being able to witness themselves and see themselves. Because of that, like I said, I can hypothesize what others are thinking and feeling about me. And so many teenagers will spend like hours thinking about what other people think about them. And now with social media, there's that additional layer of complexity, right? Where they're actually getting live feedback on what other people think of them. Before, like when I was a teenager, I could just like imagine what other people were thinking about me. Very few people said anything to my face. But with social media, now I don't just have to imagine it, I can actually see it happening in real time. I post a picture and people like it, or people don't like it, or people make a comment, and suddenly, I know it. My worst fears have come true. They're actually thinking all these bad things about me. And here's the thing, something that we do, there's something called the negativity bias. And so what that is we will pay more attention to negative things than we do to positive things. We'll pay more attention to dangerous things than we do to safe things. It's just the way the brain works. So if there's one negative comment in 200 positive comments, that child will pick that up and they will like magnify it, right? And so statements like, oh, it's no big deal, it's just one person who thinks that, but they're going to make it like, that's the only person who actually telling me the truth. right? So they're already feeling unsure about who they are, and now somebody on the outside is feeding into that. How do we support them through that? We ensure that they have places where they can go that are not peer oriented only, that are adult oriented also, because adults are a lot more forgiving than teenagers with each other. Well, they can be. Adults can also be a lot more critical, but they also can be a lot more forgiving. So being strategic about who are the adults that you're surrounding your child with, who's in your circle and who are they watching. So I want to belong. I become the most important to me, and I can hypothesize what others are thinking and feeling about me. Now, the last thing, there's many things, but the last thing I want to talk about with you today is I can imagine the ideal. I can imagine the ideal. Now, why might this be a problem for parents? Well, suddenly your teenager is seeing the ideal parent. And guess what? That's not you. Uh-oh. Up until now, you were great. They loved you. They adored you. They thought you're amazing. And now suddenly, you're not, right? Because at this age, children can imagine perfection in a way that they couldn't before. Before, they just accepted whatever was in front of them. But now they can project out and imagine what the perfect teacher would behave like, how the perfect parent would behave. And generally that perfect parent is somebody who makes it all about them, does whatever they want, like all of those things, right? So they can imagine how it could be, and then they're frustrated that it's not like that. This is the first time their brains can do this. And so if you feel like suddenly your kid doesn't like you, well, because now they're comparing you to some sort of ideal that they have in their own imagination that wasn't there before you were it. And now suddenly there's some other idea of what could be better than you. So, and again, this is just developmental. You haven't done anything wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. It's just what's happening naturally for them. And the reason for that ideal, the capacity to look for the ideal, is because it's like, what do I want to develop into? So this is where a lot of frustration can show up for teenagers, because I see what the perfect student would look like and act like and achieve, and I can't be that. I see what the perfect athlete would look like and be like and achieve, and I'm not that. I'm just average in sports, or I'm good at school, but I'm not perfect, right? Because you can't be perfect. We know this as adults. There's no such thing, right? But in the teenage mind, there actually is an ideal, and I can get there, and I'm frustrated because I'm not there. Okay, so that's another psychological thing that happens that impacts how they relate to you. End of the day, it's how they relate. That's why they're relating to you that way suddenly, because there's something out there that's better than you in their mind. So just linking this back to peers. Now, if they can imagine the ideal parent, and that's not you, they can imagine the ideal teacher, and they can't find that. They can also imagine the ideal friend, and they may or may not have access to that person. The ideal romantic partner may or may not have access to that partner. So there's a lot of frustration in this stage, and a lot of comparing that happens just as part of the changes that happen at this stage of life. I want to take a few minutes now to talk about the myth of peer importance. So you'll see here in this picture, they all have the same, it looks like, clones of each other. So somewhere along the line, we forgot that adults make adults. Somewhere along the line, we thought that kids can help each other grow, right? Which is not untrue, but it's not really possible to be friends until you have a certain level of emotional maturity. Okay, so real friendship isn't possible until you're able to accept the other person exactly as they are, not take things personally, and be rooting for them, even if it means So it's like their interests and their activities are as important or more important than you and your needs, right? So to be able to make someone else important, more important than me, to be able to be vulnerable with them, to expose my tenderness, and that's friendship. So what we're calling friendship in children is actually more like playmates, right? Or buddies, people who hang out together. But unless there's some really like grounded teenagers, there are some very grounded teenagers that can make deep, meaningful, vulnerable friendships. Most teenagers they're basically bigger playmates, taller playmates. Because remember, they're self-absorbed. So it's very hard to see the other person and to actually be there for someone else. They can do it, but it takes a lot of effort. And they're like, you get a diamond in the rough here and there, one or two like that in your child's friend circle. And so all their friends are not really their friends. If they are talking badly about them, judging them, comparing themselves to them, making them feel bad, they're not your friends. But we can't tell them that, again, like they're not going to hear you. One of the things that we can do is think about who are the peers that that kind of like we would love to have. I would love my child to be friends with this person. Just kind of in your mind. You don't have to say this out loud, but just start imagining, like, who are the kinds of children who your child would thrive with? Not to keep them out of trouble. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. It's more like who shares the interests and the values and the excitement that your child does about whatever areas of their life that they're interested in right now. We've said, like, there's this whole thing, and Dr. Gordon Neufeld talks about it in his book, Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And he talks about how we've become a society of what's called peer orientation. And so that means we look to people at our own level for guidance and mentorship instead of people who are actually older than us and more experienced than us. And we do this we encourage our children to do this from a very young age, right? Play dates. They're actually not as important for childhood development as we have made them to be, right? It's actually meaningful relationships with adults that creates maturity in our adolescents, in our teenagers. So just to be mindful that there's a difference between, our assumption was that in the teenage years, teenagers will get to know themselves, right? That was one of the goals, that they'll get to know themselves. But unfortunately, that's more the exception than the norm. In the culture that we live in, the norm is really more focused on fitting in than knowing yourself. And so when a child knows themselves and knows what they stand for and can stand their ground, then when they go and they join a group, they don't lose themselves, right? They don't melt into this group. They continue to keep their head about them, right? Oh. So where was I? Yeah, so this is another way of thinking. Like, you might have not thought this way before, because again, like, I was really sold, like, yeah, play dates are really important and kids need to be around other kids. And with like the COVID, and it's like, oh my gosh, our children aren't going to have a chance to socialize with each other. But how many families I've talked to that have said their kids are so, in that first year, were so happy at home when their parents were paying attention to them. Because we've forgotten, right? We've forgotten to pay attention to the people within our own four walls. And that's how, evolutionarily, that's how we were designed, to look at our parents and our grandparents and our aunts and uncles and our neighbors and other adults to say, how do you live in the world? How do you become a responsible citizen? Can't look to other, that book, right? Lord of the Flies. Like, you can't look to other, they're not there yet, right? It's so anyway, you get it. I don't have to go on more, but there's this just getting it out of our mind that friends are everything. Friends are important, right? Relationships with peers are important, but to ask yourself, are those friendships, or is your child suffering in those interactions? Because sometimes, like, I've heard so many times where kids are like, they actually don't have friends that they can be vulnerable with. They keep that superficial level of belonging, but it's not really attachment. It's not really bonding. because they can't really share their whole self. They can only share what will be acceptable to the people at their level. So just wanted to put that on the table, that friendships absolutely are important. And until a certain level of maturity, we're not actually capable of real friendship. It's more like play dates and hanging out. Okay. So the other thing is, we often thought that, once a child reaches a certain age, that they're like, they're kind of capable of like feeding themselves and looking after them. We can leave them and they can be fine. And what the research is telling us is that we actually need adults around at home and in the communities still, even for 13, 15, 18-year-old people. Because if there aren't adults to attach to, they'll attach to each other, which is okay, but it can't be only that. Right? So having kind of popping in and out and being around, and not just expecting that because your teenager can feed themselves and clothe themselves, that they're fine by themselves. They actually need you, even though they don't look like they need you, and they'll tell you they don't need you. They do, right? They need your kind of gentle presence in the background. They do. Don't tell them I said that, but they do. So that's kind of the myth. Now, I'm going to switch gears here. You have a little bit of context about, youth and what's happening to them and what's happening in their peers and that pull to the peers. But so if home is not a great place, then of course kids are going to want to be somewhere else, right? Psychologically or physically, they just don't want to be there. So we have to take a little moment to look at our own selves and say, okay, what kind of household, what kind of family environment am I creating for my teenagers? So Barbara Coloroso came up with these three parenting styles, she calls them, and she calls them the brick wall family, the jellyfish family, and the backbone family. So this might be familiar to you if you've ever read her work, but I'll just kind of break it down for those who might be hearing this for the first time. So the brick wall family, that is the family that says, this is the rules. You don't like my rules? Well, you're under my roof. It's my roof, it's my rules, too bad. The brick wall family is very strict, not a lot of flexibility, there's usually like one clear head of household, like there isn't a lot of kind of collaboration and decision making. It's like somebody makes the decisions and everybody else follows. And there's not a lot of room for individual expression in a brick wall family. There's, if the expectations are, if you don't meet the expectations, we're not interested in you and what you have to say. And many of us are raised in brick wall families. And when you're raised in a brick wall family, sometimes you become a jellyfish parent. And so a jellyfish parent is a jellyfish family is where like anything goes, do what you want, have a good time. Sure, I'm such a cool mom, like that. Okay, so jellyfish family, there's no structure and order, and there's no clear leadership in a jellyfish family, which is challenging because children need leaders and children need structure in order to feel safe. And that continues on past 12 and 13 and 14. They need structure and leadership. They need to know who's the boss, right? The boss doesn't have to be like dictatorial, but somebody's got to be the clear leader. And so jellyfish families can be equally difficult for children in that there's too much. There's no structure at all, right? And then of course, there's number 3, right? The one that we all want to be, which is the backbone family. And the backbone family, there's structure, there's leadership, and there's flexibility, right? So in backbone families, there's things like family meetings. Like we all sit down and we have a conversation about something. The kids get a vote, right? It might not be the final vote. Their vote might not count as much as the parent vote, but they do get to speak about what their thoughts and their opinions and their perspectives are. They have a voice at the table. And so that's what we're all like, that would be Barbara Coloroso's recommendation, is that we all move towards more of being in a backbone family kind of system. Now, backbone family means you have to be able to set boundaries. You have to be able to say no sometimes. And you have to be flexible and spontaneous sometimes and go with things and not be so rigid and structured. So it's a day-by-day thing. Like, I don't think there's a formula for how to do this. It's an encounter by encounter thing. And you might even want to ask yourself, the next time you're kind of at odds with your teenager, just ask yourself, what am I being a brick wall right now? Am I being a jellyfish right now? What might it take for me to become backbone right now? To be flexible with structure, right? Because what can happen in parenting of all children of all ages is sometimes we can regress ourselves, and because so it's like your 13-year-old is like there, and then I'm like feeling like a 10-year-old, right? I'm feeling like a 5-year-old in front of this 13-year-old, and suddenly there's this weird power struggle thing that happens. And so we have to remain adult. We have to remain in charge of our emotional responses, in charge of the words we use, being mindful and thoughtful and centered and balanced as best we can when having those interactions. And if you're not, take a minute, take a breath, go for a walk, come back, and then have a conversation. So I wanted to take this a little bit further and just do kind of a little game here with you. So this was actually an idea that was brought forward by my students in my counseling therapist program that I teach at a college, and they were doing kind of a mock parenting group. And so this was their idea, that what if we were to put these different characters in front of parents and have parents kind of start identifying what kind of parent did they have? Because here's the thing, how you were raised is going to influence how you raise your children. It might mean that you're doing it the same. It might mean that you're doing the opposite, but either way, it's in reaction to how you were raised, right? So many of us are like, I'm never going to do what my parents did. So you do the opposite. And some people say, yeah, I really like that part. So they do. But there's a whole other array of ways of parenting that we haven't even considered, because it's just in response to how we were raised. So once we know how we were raised and understand kind of the thinking process and the emotional impact of how we were raised, then we have more choices to choose from, rather than just like my parents or nothing like my parents. Okay, so let's do this game. So if you can write, so I'm going to describe these characters, and then think about your own parents, right? Specifically your parents. If you were raised by grandparents or aunts or uncles, you can think about them, but your primary caregivers, who raised you. So let's go through and talk about these different characters. So here we have Baloo. And so can you type in the chat, what are some of the qualities that a Baloo type parent might have? So when you see Baloo, what are some of the words that you associate with this kind of a character? So jellyfish, it kind of like free, right? Relaxed, humorous, happy-go-lucky, love that. Kind of like go with the flow, carefree, caring, yeah, absolutely. Fun, easygoing, right? That's a certain type of person that you can maybe think of people in your life who kind of have that vibe of Baloo. Protective, yeah, that's the other thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because remember I'm such a Disney fan, sorry, maybe you are too, or maybe you have become one because your children went through that whole thing. But in the Jungle Book, remember, it was Baloo that actually protected Mowgli at the end. He was willing to give his life. So even though happy-go-lucky and carefree, when the rubber hit the road, he was there and he showed up, for his kid. So this is one kind of example of a kind of parent that one might be. Then we have Mufasa. How would you describe Mufasa? Write it in the chat. Firm. Backbone. Yeah. What else? How would you describe that kind of a parent? Structured. Yes. Strict yet gentle. Teacher, protector, has a lot of pride, strong and proud, caring, leader. Do you remember that one scene in The Lion King where Simba does something wrong and then Mufasa is like giving him the life lesson, right? And at first he was, there was that sternness and that like communication that I'm disappointed, right? And then there was the softening and the connecting and the bonding. So the disappointment didn't sever the relationship, right? I was talking to my kids, and I always ask them, like, what do you think, like, if you could be a mom for a day and stuff like that, just to kind of get in their heads. And the other day they were in the car in the back, and they're like, you really screwed up. They were talking to each other. You really screwed up when your parent says, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I expected more from you. And my husband and I were sitting in the front like, woo-hoo, they know us so well. But that's kind of how we do it, right? Like, we took the Mufasa training book, that it's about the relationship, that, like, this is a relationship of trust and bonding, and you broke my trust, and that's the issue, right? Not the action that you did. The issue is that there's trust here that was broken, and we need to repair that trust. So not talking as much about the activity, but about the bond in the relationship. So that's Mufasa. Then there's, I don't know what her name is, the evil stepmother from Cinderella. What words would you use to describe her? Oh yeah, someone said delights in his child. Yeah, so Mufasa delights in his child. What are some? Brick wall, selfish. Ooh, my grandmother. Vindictive, yes. Brick wall, unfair. She's kind of mean, right? Scary. Favoritism, absolutely. Evil. Yeah. Some of us had mamas or dads like this. Abusive. Yeah, she was abusive. That's right. Controlling, right? Selfish, absolutely. So think about your own childhood. Was this one of your parents? How about this lady here? She's Rapunzel's mom in Tangled. Do people know her? Do people know her qualities? She's kind of a newer character, so you may not be familiar with her. There's a song in this particular movie called Tangled. People don't know. They're like, who's this lady? Sorry, my kids are still young, so I'm still watching Disney. So she was this woman who was like really manipulative. So she taught her child to be afraid of the world. She taught her child that the world is a really scary place, and the only one you can trust is me. And actually, like somebody's saying in the chat, she only cared about herself, right? She needed Rapunzel so that she could have this elixir to stay young or something, blah, blah, blah. And she actually wasn't her real mom. But there's this song in the movie where she's like, mother knows best, and she's like scary, and she's two-faced, right? And she gets in your head and she manipulates you into believing her. So that would be Mother Gothel is her name, Mother Gothel. How about Marge? What kind of parent is Marge Simpson? What are your words for Marge? Loose, loving. What else? How would you describe Marge? I feel like Marge really tries, like she's trying her best. She's really trying. Sometimes she feels a bit overwhelmed and out of her depth, out of her element. What else? Steady and caring, absolutely. Good intent. Oh, I love this one. Good intentions, but her voice is small. Yeah, right. She doesn't have that kind of presence, right? That maybe some of the other parents might have. So that's Marge. And yes, Homer doesn't help her very much. So some of our parents, maybe we had single parents or maybe we didn't, but we felt like one parent was more taking charge of the children and the other parent was kind of more disengaged. How about this lady from The Incredibles, the mom from Incredibles? Do you know her? She's also another newer character, so you might not know her. So not too well. Okay, so this mom, she stretches. So her superpower is that she can stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch. So she's like super mom. She does everything. She's the leader of the family. She's balanced. She's strong. Yeah, people are saying she's firm. She has a sense of humor. She's like super mom, like that kind of problem solver. Yeah, it's like she's got it all, and she somehow has time to do her hair, like stay in shape, and super mom. And so some of you might have had parents like that just seem to be able to do it all, and that can actually be challenging if your parent was like that, because you can sometimes feel like you're not measuring up. Like, my mom could do all of this, why can't I? She never seemed to, even like break a sweat, and I'm struggling. So having a super mom or super dad can also sometimes be challenging. How about Dumbo's mom, Mrs. Jumbo? What do you remember about Mrs. Jumbo? She died too soon. She was super sweet, super nurturing, protective, so loving, protective. Remember that one scene in Demo, it's like she's rocking her baby in her trunk, right? Because she's in jail, and she's totally accepting of her child, even though her child is different. She's just so protective and loving and accepting. So some of us had these parents who were gone too soon, right? They might have passed away, or maybe they left the family for some reason. But we have these fond, sweet memories of this nurturing parent that we never really got to fully enjoy. And the last one here, this is Kerchik from Tarzan. Do people know this guy? You know what he's like? Brick wall, you got it. Absolutely a brick wall. He's scary, he's intense, he has this like very scary presence, like that dad that you're just walking on eggshells around all the time. And so looking at these characters and kind of thinking about your own childhood of who raised you, what do you notice? What do you notice as you do this self-reflection? You don't have to tell me which character you had, but what are the thoughts that are starting to roll around in your head as you consider how you were parented? Any thoughts that you want to share as you think about all these different kinds? And there's probably lots more different kinds of parents. Just wait until your dad gets home, right? Somebody's saying, just wait until your dad gets home. That's the dad that gets home. And you're like, oh my goodness, right? And some of us have heard those things. People are saying we're kind of a mix of some of them. Yeah. Seeing yourself as more loving or more trusting. So you can probably maybe your parent was like definitely one of these, or maybe they were a mix of some of them. Somebody's saying definitely trying to break the cycle of intergenerational trauma. That's why I brought this up. Thank you for using that language. That's exactly why I brought this up, because how we were parented, and I hear people say all the time, like, I'm fine, they did, but I'm fine. But are you? Or are you just like fine on the outside? It's like crazy on the inside, not fine, right? We all have our demons that we're fighting. And if there's some demons that we can fight ourselves and not pass along to our children, then why wouldn't we, right? Why wouldn't we? So someone's saying she had the super mom, dad was physically there but absent. Someone's saying, I'm very conscious of what didn't work for me, but sometimes I need to remember what did. Yeah, right? Sometimes it's easy. Remember negativity bias. It's easy to remember all the bad stuff, but there's some really sweet things that happen, and maybe we can emulate some of those as well. So now that you know how you were raised, I'm just going to quickly remind you about discipline. We talked about this last time. So discipline is not like forcing your child on this difficult road of punishment and difficulty and making sure they pay. It's like helping them from where they are now to becoming the adult that they're going to be, and providing along the way some of these milestones. So trust, support, presence, and guidance. So thinking about when you're disciplining your child, what are you achieving with this interaction? Are you doing this to them and leaving them to walk the path on their own? Or are you being these guideposts for them and helping them become the adult that you know they can be? One of the things that a lot of parents forget is that teenagers are already full. They're full of their own ideas. They're full of their own opinions. They're full of their own ways of seeing the world. And so you can't put anything else in there until you until you let them empty themselves, until you hear them out about what's in them. Many of us try to like dump on more, but it's like they're already full. They're already full. Let them tell you what's on the inside. Start drawing out what's on the inside. They have their own inner compass. You've put it there. The last 12, 13, 15 years, you've been working on that. It's there. But they won't show it to you if you keep telling them what to do all the time. Rather, if you trust them and draw out from them what's important to them, ask, don't tell. Ask them, what do you think about this? And then shut up, just shut your mouth, shut and listen. And the thing about many teenagers is they'll want to talk at a very inconvenient time for you. You are like tired, it's the end of the day, you are done, and they're like, sit down on the couch and they're ready. Perk up and listen and let them talk. Ask questions that will generate them emptying themselves, because then there's room for them to hear you. Okay, so let them empty themselves out before we try to put more things in there. And some things, like, be honest with them about if you don't know. Like, actually, I'm not really sure either. I struggled with the same thing when I was your age and I never really figured it out. Or what I figured out was this, but it might work for you, might not. Really kind of not preachy. The opposite of telling, however that looks for you and your family. So drawing them out, finding out what's inside of them. Now, the last thing I wanted to do in the last few minutes that we have together here is putting our heads together, because here we are, we're a room full of parents. And how often do you get to sit with a room full of parents and get each other's ideas? So I thought what we would do now is just in the chat, write down a tip or a trick that you use that works for you that you'd like to share with everyone. Share with everyone. So I'll give you one of mine. So one of mine with my 13-year-old, he's just getting in there, is so the other day, I'll give you the example and then you'll see what the trick is. So he called me. So I'm here in a different city than him right now. And he called me and on FaceTime and he said, hey, now he's called me, which is not something he usually does. So I know something's up. I know he's needing something. But because he's a teenager and because he's a teenage boy, he doesn't have necessarily language for that. So the tip that I want to share with you is how to draw out. So I said to him, hey, how's it going? Fine. What was the most interesting thing in your day today? That's the tip I want to give you. Instead of saying, how's your day? What was the most interesting thing in your day? Or what was the most surprising thing in your day today? Or what's something you appreciate about today? I don't know. Just think about it. Like if you were to take a wild guess, what's something you appreciate? So this way we're getting a little bit more content from our children than just, I don't know. So be thoughtful about how you phrase the questions. That would be one of my tips. Here's a good one. At the end of the day, when we do tuck-in time, I make time for us to talk or read or be silly. I'm hoping this will help us stay close. Thank you, thank you, thank you. They're never too old for tuck-ins. They need you. And at night, when it's dark and it's the end of the day, their vulnerability, their guard comes down a little bit. Even the 15-year-old, even the 18-year-old, their guard comes down a little bit. And so that's in the dark, you can kind of have those conversations about their dreams or what's important to them, or silly and fun and just bonding. I love that. Good one. At bedtime, I ask, what made you laugh today? Puts a smile on their faces as they fall asleep. Another tip I have is family vacations, letting them have input, a little bit of input about, so like, would we prefer to go swimming today, or would we prefer to go for the hike? And just kind of set that so that they feel like they have a little bit of a voice on family holidays. That's another trick that I use. We always ask, what do you know or learn to, ooh, this is a good one. What did you know or learn today that you didn't know yesterday? And I'll take one last one until we wrap it up here. Fake it till you make it. Yes. My son loves sports and it's one of the best ways to connect with him. I know nothing about sports, but ask him questions about sports and take him to games to bond with him. I may be tuning out, but he doesn't need to know that as long as I get my precious time with him. Yeah, show an interest in what interests them, even if it makes no sense to you at all. Like there's like Pokemon and like, I don't know, video games, like some Dragon series books that I'm reading right now that I have no interest in, but it gives us language to talk to each other, right? So taking an interest in what interests them, it'll keep you connected as you go. So I believe that's our last, it's our last slide. So I will pass it back to Rick to close.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Dr. Saira, for another wonderful presentation. Super informative. I love the piece just about belonging and having the caring adults who can help guide youth to their new huts. And then also the analogy with the brick walls and the jellyfish and the backbones, and then kind of visualizing with the cartoon characters. Again, I super appreciated that. For all the registered attendees tonight, we'll be emailing a new invitation for our third and final session on June 8th. And lastly, again, I would just love to thank each and every one of you for attending tonight's presentation, for taking the time out of your busy evenings and just doing a little bit more to try and learn about your youth. And again, can't thank you enough for being here. We've recorded tonight's presentation, as Dr. Saira mentioned at the beginning. It will be posted on Dr. Saira's YouTube channel, Dragonfly Wellness TV, and will also be on our website. So I will email a link that will have all that information. It'll probably be ready in a few days, maybe at the beginning of next week. And other than that, have a great evening. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again for the third session, as well as our opening celebration for the Wellness Center. I have to plug that in there one more time. So that'll be on Saturday, May 14th, with more details to come. Thank you and good night, everyone. Dr. Saira, thank you again.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Somebody's asking when the next session is, Rick?
I believe June 8th is what I had in my calendar, so I will write that down. Session invites. Perfect. There we go. I love the chat function. I mean, I know that in person's great, but sometimes it's easier for people. Like, you can only take like passing microphones around an auditorium and getting people to ask. You can't get as many people. So I just love all the feedback that people are able to provide kind of through this vessel. Great. All right. Well, Dr. Saira, thanks again. I know you're an hour later than us over there right now, so we'll let you get back to your family, and congratulations to your sister as well, and your and the triplets. So have a great night, and I'll be in touch.
Okay. Bye, everyone.